building a startup is all about experimentation, about understanding your customer pain point, launching something, failing quickly, launching again.
My next guest on the 1% project is Pushkar Mukhevar. Pushkar is the CEO and co-founder of Drip Capital. Pushkar, in this conversation, talks about his journey building Drip Capital, taking it from zero to $2 billion of transactions on the platform, getting accepted to Y Combinator when it was just two founders and an idea, scaling Drip Capital to 250 plus employees, and raising 500 million plus in venture funding. If you have any feedback about this conversation, speaker or topic recommendations, you can drop me a line at pritish@1%.live. You can also sign up for the 1% Project newsletter at 1%.live for show notes and key insights from this conversation and every other conversation. Welcome, Pushkar, to 1% Project.
Hi, Pratish. Nice to be here.
What excites you the most about building a business?
I would say it really comes down to two things: really solving a customer problem, which we could relate to. And growing up, I had seen a lot of small businesses struggling with getting access to credit. Particularly, the problem is a lot more prominent in markets like India, where traditional institutions are not servicing the customer segments. So one thing which is obviously exciting is how our product is able to drive impact and really solve like a pain point, which is close to our heart and is impacting a number of small businesses in the markets we operate in. The second thing which excites me about building a business is that it's really all about people. And as part of this journey, we've now have a team of over 250 people. And I think for a lot of the people, this is their career. And at some level, enabling personal and professional growth for all the people who are associated with us in this journey is also immensely gratifying and exciting for me.
How was the experience pitching to YC?
I would say obviously a very different setup then. It was just the two of us, me and my co-founder Neil. So maybe I'll give you some more background how we got started and then leading up to, I guess, the YC pitch. We had already spent maybe over a year leading up to that point. So, my background was largely computer science, and then I spent a number of years in financial services. My co-founder also had a similar background. He'd spent mostly a CS grad with a number of years in Wall Street. So we were both itching to venture out and launch our own startup, but were not very sure about what exactly we were going to do. And we decided to choose on fintech as the domain, and within fintech credit specifically, just given our background. So we decided to pretty much quit our jobs in 2014 without really knowing exactly how this is going to go, what problem we're going to solve. We had some hypothesis, but we decided to quit and said that, okay, that's the only way we'll be able to kind of go out there, figure out in the market and put ourselves in a spot where we had to figure it out almost. So when we pitched to YC, by then we had probably spent 15 months or so trying out different things. While we were still two of us, there was a lot of work which had gone behind, like really figuring out a customer problem where we could come out with a solution and solve that customer problem. So by the time we went to YC, we really had a good understanding of the customer pain point. And that was something which YC really cared about. While we didn't have a team, we had launched with very few customers at that point. The one thing which YC kept focusing on, and I do believe fundamentally that is a crux of any startup, is that do you really understand the customer pain point and do you really understand how and why you would be able to solve that pain point? We had done a fair amount of work on that. So that was one thing we could crack in the YC interview. The interview itself was an interesting experience. I'm sure you've spoken to other speakers, but it's like a rapid fire interview, 15 to 20 minutes with four YC partners sitting across the table. No answer can be more than sentences because they cut you off if it's too long. So we also obviously had to practice to get it right. But no, really glad that they decided to take a bet on us at that point. And it's the first sort of external validation you get about your business, about your product when someone like a YC decides to invest. And that was to some extent like a game changer for us, and things started moving in the right direction post that.
You are a business which has gone from zero to $1 billion in transactions on the platform. Walk us through that journey.
Post YC, we had realized that the business model which we were operating, which was really focused on US SMBs, was not something where we had a differentiated acquisition strategy. So we couldn't really acquire customers economically. And the risk also, we couldn't basically figure out a way to manage risk at scale. So we pivoted from there to So one of the things which we had observed during those conversations was that many of the customers we were working with in the US oftentimes sourced products from factories in Asia. And also we realized that the credit problem was more exacerbated when it came to emerging markets than perhaps in the US. So in 2016, early 2016, this was 3 months after YC, I had moved back to India. It was still just the two of us, Neil and I, and Neil was still in the Valley and I had moved back to India. And we were like, okay, you know what? This is a pain point we know exists. So let's start really focusing on customers in this segment of the market. So I was pretty much for the first 3 or 4 months doing everything from pre-sales to sales to operations to really getting the customer onboarded and working with them. And we signed up our first 3 customers. Obviously, given that it was a credit business, ran out of all the seed capital we had raised. So clearly the next step for us was to raise more capital, and we were like, okay, we have some equity, we need to raise more debt capital or credit capital. Neil started focusing his efforts on that, largely focusing on Valley investors. The realization we had that was in the Valley, like, people didn't understand credit, but they understood startups and they understood basically venture. So while in an attempt to raise debt, what we ended up doing was raising a large seed round of like about $4.5 million. And we're like, okay, as long as it's capital, like, we can obviously like figure out how we best optimize the use of it. So that was like the next phase. So we had 4.5 million in the bank. So it was not just YC capital, but we had raised another 4.5 million. We had a few customers. We clearly had a problem which we had identified. And now we really needed to start scaling things up. So we ended up hiring our first 3 hires at that point. So the first one was our engineering lead, who really started building like version 1 of our product. We got a trade finance domain expert on. He had spent about 20 years working with likes of Standard Chartered, ICBC, many of the large trade finance banks, because he obviously had the understanding of the different issues which customers have when it comes to trade finance, more so from a regulatory standpoint, from a risk standpoint, and so on and so forth. And it's been exponential since then. Now, along the way, so that 5-member team is now about 270 people. India was the primary market we focused on, mostly 2017, 18. The vision was always to build a global platform where, because we believed that the problems we were solving for Indian SMBs, it was not very different when it came to other emerging markets as well. And we launched in Mexico in 2019 with, again, trying to continue to ensure that we had one global product, but we had distribution teams built out in different geographies. So Mexico was the first market we launched in, and that's been scaling up well for us. We also launched a US business after that, which was focused on US small businesses, came more organically to us. And along the way, different teams, different functions have scaled up. And I think for an organization to scale up, ultimately you're building a machine and you're making that machine scalable. So every part of that machine has to scale up. Initially, it was a lot of individual contributors who just had to get their hands dirty and do whatever it took. Then it became about setting up processes and starting to build out teams. And we had smaller teams, so managers who could manage small teams. Then it became about how do you get senior people on board who can really think about the function or think about that particular domain and think about how to scale it up for handling 5x, 10x, 20x the scale. So that's been an iterative process. People have scaled up along the way. We've obviously brought on many more people along the way, and it's been an exciting journey.
Looking back, trade finance has a very simple business model. You lend money, people return it with an interest, and you repeat. Looking back, would you build demand first or supply?
I would say definitely demand, from the standpoint that even supply providers require demand. Let me take a step back. I would say that you actually have to start with demand. Of course, you need to get your first pilot set of customers, get that going. And then you start building more and more supply. Once you have a lot of supply, then you continue to build demand. So you are effectively operating in like a marketplace kind of model where you need customers who are requiring this capital. And obviously you need capital providers and investors who are looking to invest in this asset class. So it has been, and it continues to be like a process where you need to keep expanding on both sides and ensure that both of them are in sync. So I don't think it's one or the other. It is a simultaneous process.
How do you keep your competitive advantage in this space?
I would say 2 things. One is really the technology which powers our risk management. While trade finance is an industry which has existed for a long time, the SMB space has not been serviced well. And the reason why it's not been serviced well is because banks have perceived it, always thought of SMB segment as a risky segment. And second, banks haven't really figured out a great way to manage risk at scale when it came to SMB segment. And that's where our focus is. Really, where we focus on is how do we continue to enhance our data infrastructure? How do we have a completely automated risk management system? How do we continue to understand more and more, build models where we can predict risk better, where we can manage risk better? And how do these models keep improving as we have more and more data on our platform? And that data is proprietary to us. We've gone through this experience of doing over $2 billion of transactions. We've also had, of course, our share of delinquencies in the past, which have been very instrumental in teaching us. And hopefully we've not been making the same mistakes again. But that has been a key competitive advantage. The second is our supply of capital providers also. Any new kind of credit platform has to go through a journey where they can attract institutional capital providers. And the reason is, of course, any institution who is coming at and investing and looking to invest in the assets from the platform, they're looking for track record. And unfortunately, you can't have track record till you have one. So we've had to go through that journey of really starting with small family offices and hedge funds and credit funds to then smaller community banks to now having a bank like Barclays as a partner. So that's been a journey as well. Like, and it's taken us again 4 or 5 years, over 2 billion in transaction volume, a lot of track record to get large institutional investors comfortable with our platform, our product, our model.
Your relationships with your initial investors to your present day investors. YC has a very different mindset. They are willing to actually back two founders, probably who have a great idea. And today you raise from institutional investors as well. So how has that experience been? How have you been able to adjust that communication or that relationship? Is it the same? Is it different?
The relationship has also evolved with the maturity of the business. And accordingly, for example, investors like YC are very comfortable with seed stage. Like they understand the challenges which a seed stage company has. And we could easily have conversations where we would say that, hey, you know what, this is not working out. Because at the end of the day, they also recognize that a lot of times building a startup is all about experimentation, about understanding your customer pain point, launching something, failing quickly, launching again. Right? And they're very comfortable with that model. They understand probably more than any other investor in the world how early stage companies work and what are the challenges which they face. As we've matured as an organization, the kinds of relationships or the kinds of investors we have been able to get on board have also matured and have also changed or evolved along the way. Investors who've come in and participated in our, let's say, Series B and C rounds, they also have a certain level of expectation, which is a lot more around predictability of the business. There, it's a lot about how we can be very predictable in terms of our quarterly, monthly numbers, but then what are the kinds of things we continue to do or we continue to need to do in order to accelerate growth and keep removing the bottlenecks and keep growing. So the conversations are a lot more data driven. They're a lot more structured. During YC days, we never had a board meeting. It was literally an office hour with one of the partners. Today we have quarterly board meetings, we have monthly MIS calls, we have monthly MIS reporting. So the discussion is a lot more richer in terms of data and the analytics and a lot of the data which is coming from but the one common theme has been that you always, or at least I've tried to have a relationship with the investors where they know what's happening and build a relationship where I can be open with them and they can also have that same level of trust and openness with me. And that's very important because to large extent, any investor relationship is almost like a partnership, definitely more so from folks who've come on board like earlier, where you are constantly working together to build this into a large company. And that has remained constant while the nature of conversations has definitely evolved.
Now you manage a team of 250 to 70 plus people. And 6 years ago, you were 2 people. How have you evolved as a leader?
As I mentioned, it's all about people. And of course, as the founder, CEO, it's also always a personal challenge and a great learning opportunity because my role has to evolve every 3-6 months as the scale of the team and the scale of the company grows. So I would say that a big change has been first maybe 2 or 3 years of the company, I was a lot more external focused, meaning that lot more focused on talking to customers, really understanding the customer pain points, and also being quite involved with getting my hands dirty. So if it required me to make a sales call, I would do that. If it required me to help out on a product, I would do that. And so on that, at some point, as we started building out a sales team and building out these different teams, the role became more about hiring and bringing on the right set of managers, initial set of managers who could manage the team at that scale and could perhaps were scaled to take the team to the next level. Over time, that role then, as we had more functions and more managers, and over time, even more senior managers, the role became a lot more internal, where you're focused a lot more on ensuring alignment. So delegation. So maybe if I was to summarize it, the first part was really like doing a lot of the work. Second part was really around figuring out delegation effectively. And third part has been a lot more about motivation and alignment, where delegation is something which anyways you have to do, just given the scale of the business, there's no option. But ensuring that all functions, all leaders are aligned, we are all running in the same direction, we are moving in the same direction, and all our energy is going in the same direction is also equally critical now. One thing which starts happening is, so it's not just alignment, it's also ensuring that the culture of the company continues to scale as we scale. When you're small, everybody knows everybody's friends with everybody and there's less conflict, right? As you scale up, as you have more and more senior people, there's the likelihood of more conflict, and that can really derail the organization. So the focus really right now is around alignment and around culture and preserving the culture of the company.
You have a very interesting hire. You have a chief of staff who has a very strong product background. So what was in your mind bringing a very strong product guy to be a chief of staff?
I guess you're talking about Akshay. Akshay joined us about 4 months. Yeah, so he had a background in both consulting and product. So he was with McKinsey in the past. More recently, he's been with. So the idea was to basically bring on someone senior who can drive organization-wide initiatives, organization-wide projects. Chief of staff, in my view, is a really high leverage position because a lot of times when you get to the stage we are in where we are 250 plus people with multiple managers and leaders, it's very critical to do a strong job driving organizational wide initiatives, organizational wide projects. Secondly, a product management background helps because in general, I see that folks who come with a product background are, first of all, first principle problem solvers. And secondly, they're also very data driven. And both these skills are actually quite critical to be able to get multiple people aligned and drive these organizational wide initiatives, making them a lot more data driven and being very first principle in their approach to problem solve. So it's been working out well. It's been great having you on board.
You've hired a number of people across different functions. Do you have a favorite question?
One question I do try to get a good understanding of is what do people believe is their greatest achievement? That generally speaks volume about their motivation, what drives them. Also talks about like perhaps the difficulties they've had to go through to achieve what they sought out for. So that is one question which I usually definitely ask in every interview to get a better understanding of the personality and the people we bring on board.
Now the business is in 3 key markets, Mexico, SF, and also in India. How have you seen the culture amalgamation across these markets?
I would say that a key aspect of being able to ensure that there's consistency in culture across different geographical locations is really around two things. One is bringing on the right set of leaders who are very culturally aligned with the organization. So, for example, the person who heads Mexico for us, from a cultural standpoint, is like the perfect fit. He is someone who embodies like all the traits we would say we would want in a high performing Drip employee, right? And ensuring that he came on board or bringing on someone like him has also ensured that the entire Mexico team, which we've been able to build, embodies that culture. And we've been able to have the same culture, same kind of, we speak the same language across geographies, right? The second thing has been really articulating it. We've started doing it now, Perhaps we could have started it earlier as well, but we also realize that it's important to be more explicit about what we mean by our culture. So we've done an exercise, very comprehensive exercise of really understanding what are the traits which we as an organization exhibit, what are the traits we strive for, and then really articulating that culture and ensuring that then flows in every aspect of your employee life cycle, whether it's hiring, whether it's rewards, whether it's appraisals, it's retention. Those two things, like bringing on the right set of leaders who are culturally aligned, and then ensuring that you really articulate the culture in very specific, simple to understand language with specific examples across the employee life cycle. I think those two things would be, in my view, critical.
When you enter a new market, Mexico or different parts of the world, how do you think about entering the market from hiring people and actually building an establishment there?
I can specifically talk about Mexico. Maybe if we reflect back, there have obviously been some positives or pros of launching in a geography like Mexico. There have also been some obvious challenges which we should have perhaps thought about again, but experience teaches you a lot of things. So when we launched in Mexico, the thought process was much more analytical again, which was the fact that Mexico is a large market, $300-400 billion in exports. A large part of Mexico exports go to the US, where it's much easier for us to underwrite kind of the transactions, just given the data availability and so on and so forth. The practical challenges which we maybe slightly overlooked was that firstly, it's Spanish. That had obviously resulted in us hiring more Spanish speakers. In fact, training some of our centralized ops people who are sitting in India to learn Spanish. And that was not something which we maybe gave it too much thought, but then there are a lot of practical challenges when it comes to that. Secondly, given that a lot of our operations are centralized, there's also a time zone challenge when you're dealing with folks, customers who are, of course, in a completely different time zone. But that being said, so these are challenges which we've obviously been able to overcome. So in hindsight, was that the best market to go after immediately after India? Maybe not. But then if I look at it today, it took us time to fix all these issues, but it's also prepared us to be more global today. So if we can handle Mexico, we can perhaps definitely launch in like Sri Lanka. So that just the challenges we had to overcome has prepared us better to be able to launch in other markets. The one learning which we've also had on the distribution side is as soon as you have more and more offices and a more decentralized team, of course, it results in more challenges when it comes to people management, when it comes to scaling up your people processes across multiple offices. One area of focus for us has been really also around how do we ensure we are focusing on a lot more product-led growth rather than thinking about having multiple offices and having a distributed sales team. So in the US, for example, which was the third market we launched, you'd be surprised, but our entire inside sales team. So first of all, it's all inside sales. The entire inside sales team actually operates in a night shift in India. So while we do have a US office and folks in the US office, the entire inside sales team for the US business is run out of India. And that was again a learning from Mexico that we should build out an inside sales and a product-led growth strategy and experiment it with US. But having cracked that, I feel in fact the next 18, 24, 36 months of expansion will be largely focused on that strategy. So we would continue to launch in other markets, but make it a lot more driven by product, growth driven by product, and focus our sales efforts with a remote inside sales operation, mostly centralized in India or Mexico.
Can you double click on product-led strategies? What does that mean?
As the product has evolved, if I reflect on last 4 or 5 years of the product evolution, I would say that 80% of our product efforts have been really focused on building out the risk management engine, building out the internal product, so to say. And a lot of the distribution to the customers has been sales led, which means that sales is the primary point of contact. So if you come to our website in India, for example, you can submit your contact information and there'll be a sales agent who will get in touch with the customer to aid them through the onboarding process. So how we are looking to change that paradigm in the next iteration is focus a lot more on the acquisition side. So want to create a lot more of a self-serve experience rather than an assisted sales experience, which is what we've had. To some extent, even the markets even the market is a factor, like different geographies are different in terms of customer adoption and their comfort with basically opting for a self-serve journey versus an assisted sales journey. So like US and India are like the two extremes, right? In the US, most customers actually expect a sales journey. They don't want to interact with anyone to the extent possible. They
Hmm.
want to sign up themselves. They want to explore themselves. And on the other end, you have a market like India where the customer doesn't want to do anything. It's a very do it for me an economy and a market. So
Hmm.
there you have to adapt your product, adapt your approach to be much in line with what the market demands.
One question that baffled you while you were pitching to investors.
More than the question, some of the comments which have been very valuable for us. Maybe I can talk about that. One comment or one specific kind of angle on our business, which a couple of investors pointed out, which has been important for us to, or at least has helped us think about the business a certain way, is really the network effects which we can drive in the business. Because we are in international trade, we obviously started with sellers. We've been onboarding buyers who these sellers sell to. We also have a buyer side product now. Through that, through onboarding those buyers, we're getting more sellers on the platform. So how do we really crack that? Like, how do we make our product or make our business so viral that sellers are getting more, buyers are getting more sellers, and that's when we become a platform. And that is something which continues to be a work in progress. But just this initial thought around thinking about the business in the longer run as more of a platform play, which can have massive network, is something which has stayed with us, and that is something which we constantly think about. If you think about most valuable companies, that's a common pattern you would see. Amazon, for example, you get more customers, you get more merchants, you get more merchants, you get more customers. And the value of the marketplace or the platform keeps increasing as you become bigger. And that's how at least we would like to think about our businesses.
A quick rapid fire, 3 questions, 1 word, 1 sentence. The toughest thing about your job.
People management.
1 book or a blog that has transformed you personally and professionally.
Hard thing about hard things.
Your most favorite superhero.
Superhero. I don't know, Hulk.
Brilliant. Pushkar, it was a pleasure having you on the show.
It was great joining the conversation. Thanks.